Call the meeting to order, please. Welcome to the January 12th, 2015 meeting of the Rutherford County Regional Planning Commission. Happy New Year. If you would, please stand with us. Commissioner Jim Averwater will lead us in our prayer and our pledge. Jim.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to all be here today. Help us have a lively and thoughtful deliberations tonight. We also ask you to pray, help us, help our family members some of who are undergoing some health problems and some cancer treatments. Watch over them, protect them. Please help their treatments to be successful. In your name we pray. Amen.
Call the roll, please, Gail.
Rhonda Allen. Here. Jim Averwater. Here. Veronica Buchanan. Here. Will Jordan. Here. Mike Cush. Present. Craig Lynch. Here. Chip Pinion. Here. Charlotte P. Here. Steve Sandlin. Here. Mike Vaught. Jeff Phillips.
Present.
We have a quorum.
This time we need to approve our December 8th minute meetings. I'll call on our Vice Chair, Craig Lynch.
Mr. Chairman, I do so make a motion December 8th minutes be approved.
We have a motion to approve. Second. All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye. Aye. And motion carries. Items deferred or withdrawn, Doug?
No, sir. They're still all on the agenda.
Submitted for final plat approval. Item 6A, Posey Ponderosa, one lot subdivision. The item number is 14-2077, one lot on 2.01 acres, zoned RM, located along Irby Lane. Gerald Lewis Posey is the applicant. It includes a waiver to the 5-acre minimum lot size for property on a private easement. Doug.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This property is located along the north side of Irby Lane. You should have a copy of it on your tables as well as a copy in your agenda packets. There's also on the screen in front of you, you'll see the plat as well. The property in question appears to have been created back in 1989. However, it does not appear that it was done by plat, nor does it appear that any access easement was ever granted to the property. The applicants are desiring to build a house on the property, and being that the property was created without a plat or easement, staff recommended at that time that the applicants bring forth a subdivision plat to legally create the property. The plat itself is in pretty good order. The reason it's coming before you tonight is because it requires the waiver to the requirement that the tract is under 5 acres. It's only 2.01 acre. Our requirement for tracts along private easement have to be a minimum of 5 acres. Other than that, this plat does appear to be in good order. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions or discussion?
Doug, you said this track has been cut off in this same configuration since sometime in the 80s?
Yes, sir, 89.
To be clear, to access this property now, are they going to extend the existing gravel driveway right there?
I believe so. My understanding is this is owned by the same family, and they're building this house back here for family members, so they would just increase the size of the driveway back to here, is my understanding, through the access easement. Is that including the waiver as well? Okay.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm just making sure that his motion included the waiver as well.
Have a motion to approve the request and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye. Any opposition? That motion carries. Thank you. We have 4 rezoning requests that are scheduled for public hearings. Item number 7A, South Haven Development. The item number is 14-A013. Location is Ocala Road. County Commissioner is Trey Gooch. The size of the lot is approximately 262 acres. Tax map 94, parcels 1.01 and 34.0. Tax map 77, parcels 62.0, 64.0, and a portion of 64.01. Tax map 76, parcel 3903 and 3902, and that's a portion of 3902. The existing zoning is RM. The proposed zoning is PUD. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I won't go into a whole lot of the background with this application just because it has been before the Planning Commission before. By way of review, I will say that this property, or most of these properties really, were the subject of a rezoning application back in 2007 known as Cedar Brook. Since that time, that application has pretty much disappeared, and the applicants are bringing forth this new proposal. This application was originally considered again by the Planning Commission at their November 10th, 2014 meeting. The Commission at that time had several questions about the water service, size of the lots, traffic, and other issues as well. Ultimately, the Commission deferred action on this particular application until the information that we were looking for on the overall design of the subdivision could be provided, and especially in regards to the lot width of the lots that were in question. Since that time, CUD has met with their board to discuss the issue of the lot width. They do recommend minimum widths be at least 65 feet in width. The application and the pattern book you have now do reflect that 65-foot width. Ultimately, it resulted in a net decline of lots from 618 to 552, about 66 lots. There may need to be some further reduction in the cul-de-sac widths. There's been some further discussion on that, but I don't foresee that being substantial compared to what they've already done. They may lose a few lots here and there, but generally speaking, they should be somewhere around 540, 550 lots, roughly speaking. These units are still proposed to be single-family detached dwellings, and again, the pattern book does go into a lot of detail as to the type of housing and size of what they're proposing to construct. A couple of issues that still, I think, need some discussion here. One of them relates to the issue of fire protection. As you recall, at the last Planning Commission meeting, there was some discussion regarding the method that was going to be used for fire protection in the area. There was some discussion about, there was the ability to serve a certain number of hydrants, about 400 units with fire hydrants, and then possibly sprinkler systems for the remainder of those. We've had discussions with both the Consolidated Utility District, and they have representatives present if they'd like to make comments, as well as the applicant. And staff has had further conversations with even our fire staff that we really would like to see fire hydrants throughout this entire development. The purpose of the sprinkler requirement when it was introduced to the Planning Commission for consideration was really not to act as a method in lieu of fire hydrants, but if there was ability to place hydrants there, then they should be placed. So I think that is something that does need to warrant a little further discussion. The other issue that I think needs some more discussion is to do with the road improvements in this area. For that, we have had multiple discussions with the applicant on that, but I'm going to turn this over to our engineer, Mike Hughes, to discuss that in more detail.
Thank you, Doug. They have agreed to do all the turn lane improvements on Almaville Road and also the intersection improvements at Almaville and Old Shores. Currently, the Old Shores is narrower than the county standard of 20 feet wide for a ditch section road, so they'll need to widen that all the way back to Ocala, and they've agreed to do that. And they'll need to do some traffic improvements, put a stop sign up, paint some traffic lines, and they've agreed to do that. There was some discussion to maybe realign Ocala into Old Shores, but Matt can discuss that a little bit more, but they want to put that off to a later phase, and we're okay with that. But the previous improvements that we've discussed, we would like to see those on the initial phase.
Good evening. Mike did a good job. I think all the roadway improvements up front, we've said, we'll put those in with the initial phase. The realignment to make Old Shores a T into Ocala, we would like to be able to defer that to the second phase, just to try to defer some costs. It's a very front-end heavy project, as you can imagine, running the water line down Ocala and these turn lanes. So it's not that we have a problem doing it. We would just like to put it off to the second phase with that infrastructure and those roads. Matt Taylor.
Matt, I got a question here on this map. It's showing Kittywood Court and Childress Way and all. Is that a proposed road on the adjacent property, or is that already in place?
Those are proposed roads with, I think is that Stewart Creek's Farms is the name of the subdivision up there. And I think that is 1 or 2 phases away from being actually at that phase there.
That'll probably be there by the time you guys get adjacent to it, or you can't ever tell depending on market and everything else. One thing that concerns me about this is one way in, one way out. And I'm looking for connectivity for another way out in case of emergency or tornado or something like that. And I want to make sure everybody knows that we intend to connect wherever possible, because these people back here, once they buy a house on Kittywood Court, are going to say, I don't want this traffic in my neighborhood. But I think we need to have it wherever we can publicize it on plats or whatever, that we do intend to have as much connectivity as possible.
Absolutely.
For additional ways in and out for this many houses.
Yes,
absolutely. Sir. We agree, and we've actually added, at the recommendation of staff, added another stub to the east since we were here in November, kind of closer to our our second entrance onto Ocala there. So we're in complete agreement with that.
And I'd like to just add to that real quick about the subdivision to the north. They are showing a stub street to the north, like you said. Depending on what that final alignment is, that may have to shift slightly just to make sure it lines up, but that's not a big issue as far as we're concerned.
We just want to make sure whenever that comes in for final plat, they don't switch to a cul-de-sac.
Yes, sir.
Or something like that and,
right.
and cut us off right there.
Your 65-foot lot widths apply to all streets and cul-de-sacs, correct?
We have agreed in here, and we'll abide by CUD's regulations, which we got on Friday, regarding 65 feet and the plot plans and the things that go with that. So.
What's the plan for the fire protection? Are you still proposing the blended, or?
Yeah, we early last week, I believe CUD and the fire department both talked to Mr. DeMasi, and they were both uneasy with a blended mix. And so we said, if somebody's uneasy with that, we just won't do that. So we've taken that off the table. What we would like to leave open is the option between the sprinklers and those offsite demands. With 1.5 miles of offsite water line plus the water line that we have to run down Ocala, it seemed like this would be a good fit for sprinklers, but we want to get, when we get to construction plan phase, we'd like to get some contractors to give us some good hard numbers and then do some cost comparison there and leave those options open. We know we can do it either way and provide the fire protection. But as far as a mixed system, we're not going to do that.
Might be appropriate if we heard from CUD at this time before we conduct our public hearing. Anyone out there from CUD? Yeah.
Hello, Jennifer Wood from CUD. Did you want me to talk about the fire protection? Yep. Sure. So if you guys remember, we talked about the will serve letter originally, which spelled out what can take place as far as what was there already in the form of fire hydrants plus a domestic man, as well as the option for fire sprinkler if this body determined that was an option. And then we went back and did a feasibility study as well to determine what would be required in order to serve fire protection in the form of fire hydrants throughout the entire development. So both of those things are included in your packets, I believe. And so basically, what was determined on that in the feasibility study was that there would be that 1.5 miles, I think it was like 8,000 feet, that Matt had spoken to previously about down Shores Road, an upgrade that would be required to serve fire protection in the form of fire hydrants throughout the whole now 552, I believe, lots. At that time, it was 650. And so having a conversation with Doug a little bit and also with the fire chief about a mixed use, and that certainly is in our preference to do mixed use. It causes a lot of confusion, and we've that wouldn't be our preference to do a mixed fire protection in the form of fire hydrants and fire sprinkler. But we did write the will serve letter to address either or. So it just kind of depends on what you as a body decide that you would like to do as far as fire protection is concerned, and that's kind of where we left it, I think, last time. So you guys have any questions about that specifically?
Good evening, Jennifer.
Hi, Mike.
Educate me a little more, if you would, about your reluctance with the mixed use. I'm still not quite clear on your explanation as to.
Sure, I took a look at that. You know, Matt, and when we talked last time, that was something that you guys want us to look at, and I had spoken with Matt about that as well. And I took a look at it, and we talked about it internally as well. From a PR standpoint, it's really difficult to describe to people who are calling when they have there's a fire hydrant in, say, Section 2, and then Section 3 doesn't have the ability. It's really hard to describe to people why that is not able to happen within the same development. As well as there's some discussions about meters and fire and what's out there available for fire sprinkler on the residential side as well. That's, you know, kind of an internal discussion that we've had at CUD. Anyway, we came to the conclusion based on prior experience and history over time that that was not our preference to do a mixed use, just in the best interests of CUD and our ratepayers. We just didn't feel like that was the best option to go for. We did present an either or scenario, so I think that we've presented some reasonable options for the developer to consider on that, as well as whatever you guys decide, you know, to have them do on the fire protection side, and the chief as well.
If I'm reading this study correctly, there's no water down Ocala Road currently.
There's not.
So
correct.
Water's going to have to go so the discussion's really about the size of the pipe.
It is. So the volume available to serve both the domestic and fire protection in the form of fire hydrants and or sprinklers, yes.
Pipes having to be run anyway, how significant is that cost difference in upsizing that pipe?
The 1.5 miles of line that Matt had spoken about previously is the upgraded part. So 8,000 feet would have to be upgraded down Shores Road. So basically from the intersection of Ocala Road south, Ocala Road and Old Shores Road south, going across under 840 and down Shores Road is what we determined would have to be upgraded to serve that with fire protection throughout the whole thing. The Ocala Road part would have to be done no matter what. So to make the development viable, no matter whatever option for fire protection is chosen, that part of the water line would have to be installed on the front end as part of the cost.
Has anybody put any kind of numbers together
We
on that
have.
upgrade?
Actually, our engineering consultant put some numbers together, and I can't remember what those are off the top of my head. I'm sure Matt has them. We forwarded those to him as far as some estimates for what that would entail based on our analysis.
Get that? I'd just like to know that number, just FYI.
Sure. Matt, do you happen to have those with you on that? Okay.
Also, Jennifer, I wanted to ask, or for you to just reiterate, I guess, the width part of y'all's request to these lots. because this isn't a requirement from planning or Rutherford County.
Sure.
And they're abiding by that, but we're not setting a standard here through the county planning department.
Sure. Okay, so just to step through sort of that process, as y'all are aware, this is a PUD, so as far as the bulk requirements and everything go, that's why they submitted a pattern book to you that spells out what all those requirements are. When this was initially submitted, the lot widths, I think, minimum was 50. And we raised some concerns to that, and we've talked about that internally at CUD. And the last time that we met, there was still some confusion on that, I believe. And so what basically you guys asked us to do was to go back and take a look at that and meet with SEC and talk about that, which we had actually done previously. And so that went in front of our board, and our board and our engineering consultant as well took a look at that independently, and he brought recommendations back to our board, and they talked about it and looked at the things that we had recommended at a staff level that we had talked about over the last several months, really. And we came up with those requirements that Matt alluded to and that Doug alluded to earlier as far as what the board approved, our board approved on those requirements. So we just took a look at the things that Jamie Reed and Matt from SEC had proposed as far as the widths and the layouts and that kind of thing. We took a look at what we were seeing in the field and got some input from our STEP guys as well as some input from our field personnel as well. We came to the conclusion of those 65-foot as a minimum requirement, as well as critical lot plans for anything 80-foot or less. And there's some other stipulations in there as well, which SEC does have a copy of, and they're very aware of what those are. So anyway, that's just kind of a really brief overview of kind of the process that we've gone through as far as the STEP requirements.
Well, I appreciate that. I really just want you to make it public is all. You know, I'm proud the developer, the SEC and the county and, you know, and Consolidated, you are all working together here to make a good, safe, viable subdivision, you know, for our citizens of Rutherford County. So, and this PUD is probably going to set a standard throughout, you know, going forward. And so, you know, we want that standard, of course, the best that we can have it and safe as we can have it, just like.
Absolutely.
The only confusing part I have tonight is I thought we were going to have a set in stone whether we're going to do sprinklers or fire hydrants tonight.
Sure.
And I guess that's going to be at a later date before a final approval maybe or something. I'm not for sure what the situation is there.
I think from our perspective, we presented what the options are, and most of the time, from a planning commission standpoint, that is something that I usually set. You guys usually set what that is,
right.
And I usually say CUD says whether or not that can happen, and if it can't happen as far as the infrastructure in place, then we come up with what another option is. And so those options were sort of laid out, and just for somebody to choose on what that would be. So from our standpoint, you know, we've run the analyses, and those options are there for whatever you guys choose to do as far as the fire protection goes, or whatever SEC wants to do and the developer wants to do as far as the fire protection is considered. Sure. Anything else?
Jennifer, talk to us a little bit about, or I guess a question may be, the cul-de-sac issue of what the minimum needs to be. Is there something that regulates you guys that says there has to be a minimum? Is there some type of standard that y'all go by that says, hey, it needs to be a minimum of 65 or 55 or whatever? Can you talk a little bit about that, if there is a case of that?
Sure. We took a look at that as well. I think in the pattern book for this particular development, it doesn't necessarily spell out something different in cul-de-sacs than it would be for a regular lot. And it's something that we got into discussions about, like I said, whenever we are looking at this from a STEP system as a whole, not just PUDs, and got into some discussions with our STEP department and manager there, as well as some of our maintenance guys in the field and what they're dealing with. We came to the conclusion, based on all these discussions, that the minimum lot widths that are happening right now are really presenting a lot of problems, especially on the STEP side, with maintaining what we are required to maintain as far as separations by state law and TDEC regulations. So when we take a look at that and look at the plan, much like we looked at things that the SEC proposed, as well as what we are proposing as staff and CUD, of everything fitting on a lot, that's how we came up with 65 foot across the board, whether it's a regular lot or whether it's a cul-de-sac lot. And that's just for the simple matter of trying to meet TDEC regulations and those kinds of things that we have to meet as well as the other entities and utilities that put things in a mailbox and a driveway, you know, all those things. And so anyway, we came to the conclusion based on all of that, that was the best scenario as far as even in the cul-de-sacs as well. So.
Of course, all this talk about lot width only applies to step system subdivisions.
That's what we're talking
Correct?
about.
You know,
yes,
so
sir.
We're not changing anything on a RS-15 subdivision that's on regular septic or may have access to actual sewer or something like that. We're just talking about step system for anybody who's watching this at home. We're not trying to say
Right.
from now on, Rutherford County's not going to do anything with less than 65 foot. This is talking about to have room for the step tanks and just step system developments only.
Yes, sir.
Steve, your question a while ago, that when CUD looked at this, and we had committee meetings on it, and we looked at it 2 and 3 different times. We studied it a lot. We just didn't jerk 65 feet out of the air. It was a very deliberated decision on this, and what looks good on a piece of paper sometimes, putting the water line in, when you get out there with a backhoe, you get out there with a shovel, you get out there working on it, it just don't work. If you're putting in a 1 foot water line, if you, as a homeowner yourself, if you go back and repair it, you're looking at a 6 foot hole. Then you dug up somebody's shrub. Then you've got in their driveway. This was common sense was applied to this. That's how this figure came up. And we do have a presentation to present, but I think we're going to do it on our Monday meeting, right, Doug? And to explain
26.
to the Planning Commission exactly how we derived all this.
I'm willing to, and I appreciate, you know, the board really putting common sense into looking at this. It was just a couple developers I've talked to thinking that a standard's being set, you know, something pulled out of the air, and it's not. You know, you get a backhoe, like you said, you're in another man's yard over here trying to fix this one over here, and it's just not working. And so, but, you know, of course, everything put into place, value of the land, you know, X amount of lots, you know, everything, and then you want more, you know, more. Time you get the roads, driveways, like I said, sidewalks, all this sort of stuff, then, you know, what room do you have to put the house in and all that stuff. So, but, I mean, these are the things that we're working through and trying to get through, and I think everybody's working together to get a common ground here, so thank you.
Comments, that'd be fine. Yes, sir.
Arlie, you have anything on the sprinkler system or what we're talking about here?
Larry Farley, Rutherford County Fire Chief. My issue with it was that the subdivision regulations that we come up with were established when we talked about the hydrants and sprinklers, was that it was set up to where you could sprinkle a home if you didn't have access to that water. From where CUD set this up, they have access to that water. So we're just trying to follow that regulation. I mean, there's water there. They upsize the lines that they will support all those fire hydrants. And then plus when they add that infrastructure, it's going to put more hydrants out there for a lot of those other areas, closer hydrants to a lot of those other areas out there that do not have hydrants. So it gives us a little bit more shorter distance to when we do start shuttling water.
I wonder, I don't know if this is a comment on what you said or a question for Doug, but anybody has access to water if they go far enough, you would think. And so where do you draw the line? If they put in 1.5 miles of line to get appropriate water, adequate water, is that reason enough to say no sprinklers? Or what if water was 2 miles or 5 miles or 10 miles? I mean, where is the line? And we've got to be very careful about on our rules and all. I mean, I'd rather have hydrants personally, you know, but how far can you make somebody go? Because, you know, if you got enough money, you can get enough water anywhere, you know, and stuff. So it's not impossible.
If this board determine that.
You know, so we've got to be pretty careful what we do to set a precedence wherever, because we need to know exactly how far we can ask a developer to go to get the water, you know, or we need to have something else in our rules. I'm getting a little off base, but like Fall Creek is sprinkled out at past Walter Hill. Is that a PUD or is that a RS-15?
I believe it's just a straight conventional zone out that way.
We've got a lot more flexibility, in my opinion, on a PUD because we're at, you know, we can time down a little more. But I'm getting off base. Thank you a lot.
Subdivision regulations, a lot of talk when we adopted the fire code about of course, we had residential and then we backed that out. But the subdivision regulation was set up where if you didn't, like a lot of those places, you don't have the access to increase those water lines. Here you do.
And I'll just chime in on this. Some of the discussion the applicant and I had were, you know, and we talked about this a little bit, that very issue, you know, what's reasonable, you know, at that point. And as I told the applicant, I said, it's one thing if you're looking at a 20, 30 lot subdivision. I said, you're looking at over 500 homes back here. So again, ultimately, it's the commission's decision. I think it needs to be spelled out one way or the other. Like you said, this is a planned development. I don't particularly care in a planned development. I don't care for the approach of, well, we'll figure it out later. I mean, they're supposed to have that part of it figured out already. That's why they're asking for the special zoning approval. So whatever you're comfortable with, I just like it spelled out one way or the other. So.
No questions for staff? At this time, we'll conduct our public hearing on item number 7A, South Haven Development. The item number is 14-A013. Anyone wishing to talk to this item number, you may do so now. I'll declare the public hearing closed. We're open for business.
Could we find out if Matt has those numbers on what it would cost to improve that 8,000 feet?
I do not have those numbers with me tonight, and but I would think it's a rough number that we had come up with at the office was about $800,000 to $1 million to run that offsite line, and that does not include the portion along Ocala Road, which we know we have to do that anyway. That's been built into our budget from day one. But this excess mile and a half has not been. And if we'd like a commitment, I mean, I guess we could choose, but I mean, it's before we leave here tonight.
I'm confused just on one point. Is the extra mile and a half water line only needed for the hydrant support?
It is right now with the line that we will run down Ocala, regardless of what we do. We can provide fire protection through fire hydrants for 400 homes. In order to provide fire protection for the extra 158, or whatever that number is right now, we have to go the extra mile and a half off-site to provide fire protection for those.
Then, Mr. Chairman, can I ask Chief Farley a question then? I don't know if you need to come up or not. What is your...
Actually, Mr. Larry, if you can come up that way, it'll be easier to get on the record.
Chief, we heard Jennifer's comment on the mixed development for fire protection. What is your opinion of a mixed? My question really being is, what would be wrong with having the first 400 or so homes being able to be on the hydrant, and then the remainder 100 or 150 to be on a sprinkler? What's the real?
Like I say, according to the subdivision regulations, that was the issue, so that's what I was trying to follow. But it's more infrastructure out there. It gives us more access to hydrants from different locations. And of course, as that develops, you got some of the subdivisions out there in the county that don't have any of them in it. So as we built this infrastructure and these subdivisions get closer to other subdivisions that are already in place and there's not hydrants, it just brings those hydrants closer to other people.
So in essence, is this developer being the first somewhat penalized by having to pay that extra fee?
That's just my opinion, what I'd rather do. I mean, of course, y'all have to make that decision. But I think if they extend that line, there's also going to be like 26 parcels out there that's already out there that will be given access to hydrants that don't have them now. So that's another consideration. You have people that's already living out there, they're living there now, and now this development's coming in there with them. So, but the benefit they get out of it is they get fire protection too, as they extend that line.
Fire protection exclusively for that neighborhood and how that will change in an emergency situation. How will that affect what happens out there, whether I have a hydrant home or a sprinkler home? How's that going to change your job when you get called?
The sprinkler is essentially a life safety issue. I mean, that's basically it's to get people out is what sprinklers are. It keeps you alive in time to get out of the fire. Now, in that essence out there, let's say lightning hits the house, hits the roof. Well, it's going to burn up before it gets down to the sprinklers. So, I mean, even when we talked about having the sprinkler systems, when we first passed the fire code, you remember we had the residential was included in that. Well, in these subdivisions where we were going to put sprinklers, we were going to require at least one hydrant on the entrance coming in each entrance. Like if you had 2 entrances, you'd have a hydrant in each entrance. That way, if you did have a lightning strike or have some other kind of fire that didn't involve the sprinklers, you'd have some kind of water to be able to supply that fire to fight that fire.
Is that water going to be used to fill a tanker truck? Is that how you're going to get it to where it needs to go?
They would be unless we could lay out to it with a large diameter hose. So, but the thing about it is, though, the fire department gets there, first we have to, of course, you try to be familiar with your territory, but you get there, and of course, this is going to affect the Alamo Fire Department. So when they get there, they're trying to determine, is this house sprinkled or do we have hydrants? So, you got a mixed deal right there.
Matt, I was wondering, and I'm getting way off your expertise, but what about the marketability of a sprinkled house compared to a house in a fire hydrant subdivision? Is one worth more than the other?
I know that argument's been made in the past, but I honestly couldn't tell you. I might want to have somebody a little smarter on the sales side speak to that, but I honestly couldn't tell you.
I was just wondering if there's a way to recoup some of your money if they sold better. They may sell worse. Personally, I believe I'd rather have fire hydrants in my neighborhood than the sprinklers.
I can't tell you that I know that there's been several, in the city, well, I guess in the county as well, any townhomes attached basically now have to be sprinklered. And I've seen several developments that have put that in already, and that does not seem to have slowed the sales down in those particular neighborhoods.
It sounds real good to make, you guys put in the 8,000 foot of upgraded line, but there's a lot more open tracks. I went down Ocala Road a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of property out there that you guys aren't developing.
Right.
And those people are going to sit back and then they can get a free ride to some extent. So I like to see the line upgraded, but I hate to make the first guy in the door have to pay all the bill, because and he just mentioned 26 tracks or whatever that would get improved fire protection, but they're all getting it off your client's nickel right there. And that, you can argue this thing either direction. And I can't believe we just talked about a 550 lot subdivision and nobody got up during the public hearing. I mean, just for the public out there that fusses about development and things like that, a 550 lot subdivision, not a soul stood up, that's got issues on itself.
Yeah.
Couple of
Matt.
Oh.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jim.
This, I guess it's kind of an epiphany that came to me here. Recently, we had Lewis Downs that thought that they were going to have fire hydrants all the way through the development, and then they got to the back phase, and then CUD, as I understand it, told them that there was so much growth out in that area that they didn't feel like there would be sufficient water, so they were going to midstream change to fire hydrants. So I think a precedent has been set for having partially hydrant and partially sprinkled. The second thing has come through my mind: if this was proposed as a 400 unit neighborhood with fire hydrants, it would be approved, wouldn't be much discussion. And then if somebody came in next week with a 150 unit request next door to be sprinkled, that wouldn't have much discussion. Both of those would be approved separately. So although I am a big proponent of the hydrants over the sprinklers, I think in this particular case we've got a situation where I don't see that it's going to be a problem doing a split request.
Almost $500,000. Matt, I'm running some quick numbers, and follow my logic here, and the whole group can agree or disagree. My recollection is in meetings like this in the past, when we had folks talk to us about sprinklers, the cost, and this is where I'm assuming, that's always a dangerous thing, was like, wasn't it like $3,000 a house approximately to sprinkle? Does that sound like a right number? Maybe sure. Okay, let's
The number we have used as a baseline is $1 a square foot of home size, and I've had clients tell me they've pushed that number down when they've been able to mass quantity those. Okay. And so we would assume, depending on how many builders are in here, if it's one builder, if it's two builders, you know, as long as we keep those numbers up, they could push those numbers down, hopefully.
Well, Matt, give me an average square footage of one of your homes here.
I think we did minimums of, I believe it was 8. I've slept since the last time I looked at that, so hang on just a second. 1,600 to 3,000, so let's say an average of 2.
All right, so $2,000 a house, all right. And did you say there was approximately 150 homes in a later phase that you would have to sprinkle or run the mile? Was that the number, 150?
Yeah, what we've said so far is that we'll either sprinkle all of them or do the offsites.
Okay, so that's $300,000. So you're going to have that much invested in sprinklers on those 150 houses. And if your number of 800,000 to $1 million was correct, I was just trying to see what if there was a trade-off there, but 300's a long way from 800.
Well, and you know, I'm sure there are some financing trade-offs there as well. I mean, you're talking about each individual home builder paying that versus one person paying that and holding that note for however long that may take.
Is there any chance water's going to come from the other end?
The subdivision on the backside.
The one we talked about earlier,
we will be tying into that, but my understanding is the pressures there are low, and so we'll be helping them as well.
They won't be helping you. It's the other way around.
That was actually one of the reasons we did the feasibility, went ahead and did the FID, if I use the right term there, Jennifer, is that we were hoping that if we just went ahead and run that line through there, it might benefit this subdivision, but those, the required improvements were drastically more than what we ever envisioned.
Personally, I appreciate your honesty and openness, because a whole lot of people just came in and chalked off enough of this land to get the first 400 lots and got that built, and then come back in 6 or 7 years and do another subdivision, and that would have worked a lot easier for you, to tell you the truth. But you are, you know, you're being transparent, and you're probably going to get shot in the foot over it before it's over with.
I wish I could say that thought hadn't crossed my mind when I was laying in bed at night, but
Well, let me play devil's advocate, because I like to do that. You're already laying out $1 million for the new line on Ocala anyway, right?
no, that the million.
I mean, that's Shores going under.
The Shores is less. I don't even remember exactly what that distance is off the top of my head. No, down Ocala is, I think, about 2,000 feet off the top of my head.
Okay.
And so you're talking more around the 200,000, give or take.
But regardless, you have a $250,000 investment in water infrastructure.
Regardless.
Why couldn't you hydrant the first 400, and when these other properties around get developed, you piggyback off that and hydrant your other 150 houses? I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Just comes who comes to the trough first.
I think that's that was our first preference, which is how the mixed development option came up. But whenever there was some hesitancy by both CUD and the fire department, we said, we'll just take that off the table, trying to be a good neighbor applicant.
I understand. Let me ask you this, Matt. The approximately 150 houses that may need to be sprinkled, are those in a complete separate phase on this map? Or how can I distinguish what houses those might be?
Honestly, it would be the last ones that we did. So I think we've got a phasing plan on, I'll tell you what page it's on.
Well, page 6 looks like up to 6 or 4 phases. That's what you're referring to.
Let me. Oops.
And I guess where I'm going with this is, are those houses segregated by a street that splits them, or something that really sets them as a separate little island from the rest if they were sprinkled?
The area labeled as Section 3, a good portion of that is on the other side of the gas line. There's a large 50-foot wide gas line, transmission line easement that runs through the middle of the property.
Is that what this natural looking, it looks like a trail that
runs diagonal.
Right. Okay.
So to the north of that gas line, I would estimate that there's about 175 homes north of that.
Have labeled as Phase 3.
Phase 3, and it's also part of Phase 4. You'll see that there is a faint dashed white line that kind of cuts through, I won't say the middle, but the part that's kind of a circle. About one lot to the west of that circle, you'll see that white line. And that starts Phase 4. So I think there's probably roughly 50 lots in there, maybe 40. And so there's between 150 to 200 homes on the north side of that gas line easement, which is going to be a pretty good demarcation between two developments there.
All right, Matt, do you anticipate your construction sequence to follow numerical order, 1, 2, 3, 4?
I think so. I think that 1 and 2 could fall closely behind each other. If you do, for instance, get 2 different builders, they would probably like to have their own separate entrance so they can build their own models. And, it would almost start to operate as 2 neighborhoods until it really got connected in the back there. Even though it's all under one development name, it could possibly start to operate as 2 neighborhoods.
I got a question. Are you putting the same size line down Ocala either way?
That's my understanding, is a 12-inch all the way down Ocala in either case.
Realistically approve the first 400 lots, that's going to take you 5 or 6, I mean, I don't know how many lots you figure to sell a year, but 5 or 6 years anyway, probably more. By then, somebody else may have improved that other line, which could be done at the last minute, you know, at the 400 lots in. We could approve 400 lots that would be covered with conventional fire hydrants, and then at that point in time, you know, you could, you know, come back and we could talk about the last 250 lots at that point in time, and, you know, and if we still wanted them on fire hydrants, we could make you improve that line at that point in time. If nobody else has improved that line between now and then, it could be 10 years before you're 400 lots in. There's a lot of subdivisions out there that are great big that they're taking that long to build out. Miss Wood's going to tell me how she doesn't like that, but you know, that you could utilize that first 400 lots of capacity, because this is almost a separate project, increasing that 8,000 foot of line.
Oh, absolutely. That'll be a project in and of itself, completely separate of anything we're doing on site. And that thinking was part of the reason why we had went to request a mixed system, thinking we could defer the sprinklers to the end in hopes that maybe there was some help off-site. You know, maybe somebody did 4,000 feet of it and cuts that number in half for us. Maybe those numbers start to make more sense at that point. But, you know, when there was some uneasiness portrayed back to us, we just said, you know, we don't want to fight that.
There are people that don't like a mixed subdivision. I can see that. We wouldn't be approving a mixed subdivision. We just say we're going to address that issue again as we get farther down the road. And they would have conventional fire hydrants the whole time. And you may well be back up here in 6 or 7 years and we say, go improve that line, you know, but then again, somebody could have come in to develop something across the street or down the road, and a lot of that line, as you just said, could already be done.
If I may comment from the water side, I wrote the will serve letter for 400 with fire hydrants. I did not do a will serve letter for a mixed development. So with the assumption that the other 150 could be served by fire sprinklers is not actually correct, because I'd have to take into account the demand required by our fire sprinkler system on the worst case scenario. So I alluded to this with Matt in our discussions, but you guys don't know that obviously. So I'd have to take a look at that and look at what that would decrease on the other side, if that makes sense. So I did look at that in a preliminary sense. I don't have numbers for you today. I didn't write the will serve letter to indicate that. But for the fire protection standpoint, it was 400 to cover fire hydrants and the demand there. If we did a mixed system, I'd be looking at a different scenario. I just want you guys, everybody, to understand that. It wouldn't be 400 and 150 to make up 550. It'd be something less than 400 and something more than 150 if you're talking about fire hydrants and fire sprinklers, if that makes sense. I have to account for that demand. So when I take a look at a hydraulic analysis, I've got to take a look at how this development, can we serve this development with the current infrastructure and not reduce current fire protection and diminish what we have out there for our current customers and meet state regulations. So that is what I have to do whenever I'm taking a look at a development like this or any development that's coming online. So to say that, you know, they have 400 lots and then somebody else comes down the line and they want to develop, well, I can't. We have infrastructure in place currently, so I've got to take that in consideration as well. Like, are they going to eat up all the capacity there and there'd be nothing left? So that's kind of, I've got to sort of take all of that into consideration where I'm looking at where is that break even, or where is that point at which that you have somebody to do some kind of offsite development in order to make the development viable in that way. So anyway, just to give you a little bit of background on that, and also to clarify, it's not 400 and 150. It'd be something more than 150 on fire sprinkler and something less than 400 on fire hydrants.
They built their 400, then they couldn't build their 150 on sprinkler, then they would have to improve the line.
That's why I wanted to clarify that. I just wanted you guys to understand that.
400 and 150 before, just for this just now this part just be coming to light, but but they would know, paint themselves into that corner, and they would know there wouldn't be any sprinkle capacity left, and they would know they'd have to improve the line.
Sure, and something that we've done in the past as well, and I don't think that you guys have specifically requested this, but it has come up in conversations with the planning department as far as, and Mike, as far as if we would require them to do that improvement all on the front end. And we'd be willing to work on that as far as phasing, and there's a lot of upfront costs, of course, for any development, especially one that requires some kind of improvements, not just on water, but other things like roads and that kind of thing. So that's something that we'd have to take a look at. At what point would we require that, if that is what you guys decided to do as far as fire protection is concerned?
It was mentioned about coming down from the north or from Stewart's. Talk a little bit about that real quick. I know we're running this long, but
we don't have the volume available coming from that side, from the standpoint of once we get off of Almaville Road, the lines get a lot smaller. So going down Burnt Knob and coming down from Stewart's Creek, you've got 8-inch and 6-inch line, and through that subdivision is 8 and 6-inch line, if I'm not mistaken. That stub out to the south coming from Stewart Creek Farms is an 8-inch. So as far as that capacity there for fire protection in the domestic coming just from that side, I think way back in 2007, or when this first came up, that was possibly looked at coming down that private road. I wasn't here then, but I've just kind of been brought up to speed on that. And I think it was also sewer at some point. We're talking about coming down that private road. But anyway, coming down Almaville Road off the 12 and then going down Ocala with the 12, has the capacity coming through Stewart Creek Farms, where we have smaller line. That's not going to give you what they need in order to make that development happen.
even for the remaining ones potentially?
On the 150?
Yeah.
When I ran the analysis, I connected everything through. So that was my assumption anyways. And in the feasibility study, if you notice, I think the last bullet point on that is that we would require them, once they develop out to that northernmost parcel, they would be required to tie into the back of Stewart Creek Farms to provide a loop all the way through. So when I looked at analysis, I included that looping through already, looping back to once they got to that point where they were developing all the way to the north. That makes sense.
Did I hear you say that you all would prefer all the improvements be made on the front end, as far as the improvement of the 8,000
Valley
foot
Road, are you talking
line?
about the upgrade?
The
I'm saying
upgrade.
they haven't requested us to look at what point we would require that, but that is something that we'd be able to, we've done that in the past, as far as at what point would we require them to do that?
They could do that later on after
Sure.
they started generating some return, instead of dropping an extra 800,000 at the get-go and
Right,
haven't
and
sold
we've
any
done that in
lots
the
yet.
past for other developments, yes, sir.
Doug, if we chose as a group tonight to limit how many we approve, does it have to be deferred and just redone and then brought back through?
I don't think so. I think you could make that as a condition, and I will say that that would not be unprecedented. Several of you may have been on I know several of you were on the board when the Muirwood subdivision came through several years ago on Rucker Lane. Originally, the condition was the first section be limited to 60 lots due to some pending road improvements. Now that ended up coming back as an amendment to remove that condition, of course, because the city was building Veterans Parkway and everything at that time. But that has been done on a plan development before.
Our preference as an applicant would be at this point to do all sprinklers, and not be looking to reduce number of lots. We've already reduced from, the 66, which is a pretty significant number. That's over 10%. And we'd like to stay with the fire sprinklers and do the improvements down Ocala.
Doug, I think as far as a plan goes here, We've got a complete plan, but what we're talking about now is a technical issue that really has more to do with the water department, doesn't it, rather than the planning department? Is it not
Well, I mean,
possible to move this forward and work and let them work out the technical issues?
that is certainly a possibility. I think what you've heard a lot tonight is the preference of going one direction versus the other. Now, of course, I know from, and that's what basically staff has told the applicant, you know, and we've made our opinions known on it too, that if the hydrants can be installed, they should be installed. And this has been talked about tonight, but I'll say it again. The intent of that regulation for the sprinklers was never to say, we're going to do this in lieu of the hydrants, even though the hydrants can be placed there. If they're going to be extending some of the lines that they're going to have to extend anyway, they are going to have certain capacity for hydrants, be it 400 lots, not as many, depending on what happens based on all that discussion. They are going to be able to put hydrants out there. That's for some amount of lots. My standpoint, I don't know if I'm very comfortable with the fact of saying, okay, we know you can put fire hydrants out there, but we're going to let you do sprinklers out in this area in lieu of the hydrants. That was not what that intention of that regulation was for when we put it into the subdivision regulations. So that's my uncomfort with that part of it. I think where I was coming from mainly, and of course I understand all the discussion that's been going on, what I come back to is this is a planned development, and these things need to be spelled out in the document because they're asking for things that are not normally allowed in the zone that it's currently zoned. That's why they're asking for the rezoning to begin with. So I'm, rather than just saying, well, we'll figure it out when we get there, I'd rather see a little bit more detail in here. Now, to Mr. Taylor's point just a moment ago when he said he doesn't want a reduction in the lots, as I'm hearing the discussion, I don't necessarily think it's a reduction in the number of lots more than it is when you get to a certain number of lots, we want to reevaluate and say, okay, do you need to move forward with fire hydrants at that time, or are we okay with sprinkling the rest of it? Now, I know there's been some discussion about do you want the mixed systems or not, but that's how I'm seeing that, not saying that you can only build 400 lots in this development and that's it. I don't think that's really what the discussion I've heard at least is indicating. So that's, I mean, to answer your question, I know that's kind of the long way around it, but to answer your question, is that a technical issue with the water department? Ultimately, I think, yes, it is, but I think it is something that does need to be spelled out in here in more detail since this is a planned development.
Go ahead. There's no enlightenment coming from here.
In my opinion, there's a lot's going to change. We've seen it. You've seen it. This body has seen it more than I've seen it since I've been around. But by the time Phase 4 gets here, a lot will have changed with this subdivision. And I think history shows that when a subdivision has come before this body, on multiple occasions it's changed hands. It's something, they've come back and requested something different. It's happened. I don't think we need to take out of account the common sense approach in making our decision tonight. My preference is hydrants, but I also agree that, you know, first one to the trough should have to foot the whole bill unless that's what they want to do. I don't like the mixed use. I can see complications not only with the water department but with fire safety. But 400 lots is a lot of lots that in itself will take a lot of time to ever get built out. Whatever we decide, I just hope we use good common sense approach and making what we think is the best decision, not only for the applicant but for the citizens of Rutherford County. But let's think about that.
We just approved this and required fire hydrants, and they could start building, and it'd be between them and CUD when and if they improve that line. And if they decide to stop at 400 houses or 360 or whatever that number is, you know, I mean, I would hope CUD would be flexible and let them, you know, not have to go out there and do that before they turn their water on, you know, not say, I want this done up front, as we discussed a minute ago, and let them, you know, get some revenue coming back in and all. But, you know, it'd be at the developer's discretion to more or less stop at that last house could be sprinkled, I mean, could be served with fire hydrant, and just not develop the rest of the property, I would think. And so that would leave it up to them if they wanted to improve the line and finish their development or not. Of course, that's getting to be a little bit messy planning by approving something that might or might not get built, but I don't know. I'm just trying to see some flexibility. Somebody has to go out there and drop $800,000 at the very start before because they're going to spend a few $1 million to start. And besides that, putting in roads and infrastructure on site. But
here's my concern with that, and I'm completely on the same page with you, Doug, in terms of what our original intent was. Hydrants, yes, first, absolutely. Sprinklers only if that's not an option. With enough time and money, like you said, you can get water anywhere. I don't know that this is a reasonable request to ask them to make that improvement that significant of an investment. But based on everything I've heard, Jennifer did not write this letter for a hybrid neighborhood on the will serve letter. We don't have a will serve letter for a hybrid neighborhood. We need her to run those numbers and look at what that would be before we approve sprinklers and hydrants. Because if we only go forward with hydrants, then when they do get to phase, whatever the phases that might require sprinklers, we don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I would think everybody would want to know that on the front end. And then if they can proceed with hydrants, they can. So what do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
Well, you're asking me. Okay, yes, okay. Make sure you weren't talking to Matt there. And I'm just throwing this out there as an option. If that is something that the commission would like to see, you can ask for a deferral on that to get that information. Now, that being said, this application has gone through at this point 2 public hearings. You're not, I don't think, and Josh may want to speak to this, I don't think you're legally required to have a third necessarily. Really, you're not required to have the first 2 that we've had. The only one you're required to have by law is the one at the county commission level. We do this as a heightened standard, above and beyond what the state law allows and calls for. But that being said, and this is something I throw out, traditionally, historically, we usually, when we defer something, we always bring it back to the night meeting. Being that we've had 2 public hearings on this particular request, and neither time, as Mr. Jordan has stated today, neither time I don't think anyone from the public has spoken. It might be possible, if the applicants are okay with that, to just go to a situation where in 2 weeks we have another meeting, our daytime meeting. Now, I don't know how long it would take CUD to get that information together, but instead of deferring this for another month, maybe just defer it for the 2 weeks pending that information. And then I think a recommendation at that point could be made by the Planning Commission, and that could be moved on to the County Commission at that point. Now, there's a lot of moving parts in that, moving parts that we're not necessarily in control of, but that is an option. I don't necessarily know if you have to wait another month to have this brought up again, and I think it would be okay just to do it in 2 weeks. That's my thoughts on it.
Matt, from the feasibility standpoint, I mean, it was your request to be able to do this hybrid neighborhood, but based on this study, it doesn't speak to that option.
Right, and we had requested that, and I think whenever CUD started talking with the fire department and talking amongst themselves, the reluctance for that sort of neighborhood came up, and so they didn't want to provide that analysis, and that's why we don't have it. And let me ask Doug something. If we do that, would that keep us on track for the February County Commission?
We could still advertise it as such, and if it turns out that at that meeting let's say for 2 weeks from tonight, if for some reason there's still not enough information needs to be deferred again, then we could just take it off the County Commission agenda. But, we have to advertise 15 days in advance for the County Commission. We could still advertise this being on the agenda, but have the option. That's happened before where we've had things advertised that we've had to pull off. So we could do that, and that wouldn't really hinder your application moving forward any.
Mr. Chair, is it possible to present a motion and vote on this PUD pending or contingent upon a letter to serve from CUD?
I think you could, I think that would work too. I mean, I think you could go that route as well. If you wanted to, if you felt comfortable enough making a recommendation tonight, one way or the other, I think you could do that, and then pending, again, the outcome of whatever that will serve letter is in a couple weeks. You know, if it turns out that it's acceptable to everybody, we just continue moving the process forward. Nothing really changes at that point.
Matt?
I was going to say, I think we would be happy with either of those options, either what Doug said or, if I understood right, just making your motion contingent upon receiving that letter from CUD. I don't think we would have an issue with either of those options.
Mr. Chair, I'd like...
we were talking over, what was your comment? I apologize.
I was asking if it was possible to go ahead and present a motion and vote on this contingent upon a letter from CUD, their letter to willingness to serve it.
Getting back to the thing, nobody wants it half and half. Nobody wants it all sprinkled, and they don't feel they have to pay for $800,000 to make it fit the other mode. I mean, we're talking in circles here to a great extent, you know. But and it gets back to what I said earlier. Commissioner Allen said, you know, what is justifiable? You can get water to anywhere. You can get water to the moon if you want to spend enough billions of dollars. I mean, so if we allow sprinklers only when it's what is feasible, what's not, $800,000, 550 lots. I mean, what if it's $50,000 and it's 3 lots? I mean, do we come up with a scenario with a number of lots, amount of money and all, and where is the cutoff line? We've got subdivisions in this county we've approved that are all sprinkled, several of them now. And they could have probably all got water if they wanted to spend enough money. 8,000 feet of 12-inch line is a big deal. You know, I mean, that's a real big deal. And so, I don't know, I'm about to convince myself just to approve it with sprinklers, personally, because we've approved a lot of subdivisions with sprinklers, and until we have some mechanism to say this is feasible, this is reasonable, you know, then we're just kind of reaching out in thin air to pick a number of lots or length of line or dollar figures, and it's not fair to anybody to do that. But sure, I'll make that a motion to approve it with sprinklers and let them improve the line down Ocala. And it, you know, because we've allowed several other subdivisions to be sprinkled in their entirety. I'll make that motion. May be a mistake, but whatever it is, it is.
Have a motion. Does everyone understand it? Need a second. I have a motion and a second.
Okay, so just for discussion purposes then, Matt, what's the downside to you if we say that we'll approve this neighborhood with whatever the number of lots are that can be supported by hydrants? What's the downside to you for us to give you that approval tonight and then, like everyone said, address that phase 3 whenever phase 3 hits?
There's I think because of the land that is associated with that, we would not be getting the entitlement for the entire project. So there's a certain amount of land there that would not necessarily be necessary for the whole development if we didn't need, you know, if we weren't going to be able to capture those last 150 lots. I think that would be the downside, if you will, from doing a phased plan like that.
Looking for a way to give you a yes.
I understand. I appreciate that.
I've got a little bit of, very little banking experience, but I got a feeling the bank's going to want to see approved lots. You know, it's gonna get back to financing and stuff, and they're gonna say, well, these last 150 lots aren't approved, we're not gonna loan you X number of dollars. So I think it gets too muddy for some loan officer somewhere to actually want to appreciate what we're trying to do there, I'm afraid.
Well, Planning Commission members, I'm going to be against this motion, and I think we've all here tried to get in the middle of something and that we really don't need to be getting in the middle of. We've got a change of zoning in front of us with 552 lots, minimum lot dimensions here, 65 foot wide and 100 feet deep, which is changed, 2-car garages, concrete driveways, so forth, so on, all these other things. We've jumped right in the middle of somebody's business that really, they've already, unless I heard it wrong, y'all have already agreed to put fire hydrants in. And I don't know why we're in the middle of this conversation. You're talking about a massive subdivision here that's got to have water, sufficient water. This gets that water there. Depending on nobody else developing around it, I can't really look at that. I can't care about that. If you want to get really deep, what about a school supporting this area once it's developed? You're talking about another school for this subdivision right here. If you just look at it by itself, fully developed, but it's going to take a while, you know. So I understand that. We don't need, our planning emphasis right now is not on all that. The developer and the engineering company have come here with a request, and here we are faced with it, and we've got in the middle of their financial situation that personally we don't need to be getting involved in. Sure, we want to make sure that maybe they make the right choices, or you know, this subdivision goes and is developed properly. Not that's what we're here for: safety, welfare of the citizens buying these homes right here, and that they can get in, get out in case of a fire, that it's taken care of. So I'm against this motion here to be sprinkled, but I'm ready to make a motion if it does come back or somebody else comes back. Put the fire hydrants in here. If it comes back another way, phase 3, 4, 5, we're going to have to deal with that then. But that gives the banks, the developer, the engineering company, the planning commission, and everyone buying these houses what the plan is for this subdivision straight up.
Want to do the first 400 sprinkle, I mean, with the fire hydrants, and what about the rest of them?
The request is 552.
They're requesting the flexibility of going one way or the other. So
all fire hydrants.
You want to
yes, sir. Just
fire hydrants the
yes,
whole way.
Mm-hmm. And I think they've got a plan for that, and they've got a number to make that happen, and that they've somewhat agreed to that. From what I can tell, that's the request that's here. So
I don't know that we agreed to that. We asked for the flexibility either way. I mean, if we've got to commit, we'd prefer to start with all sprinklers, and if for some reason that was to change down the road, come back before this board. You know, but so far we've just asked for the flexibility to be able to determine that down the road. You know, if it comes down to, you know, just approving the 400 lots and then coming back before you, you know, I think we would rather have that than, you know, just an ultimatum here as far as no. So
Matt, you are comfortable with putting in ever how many fire hydrants that Jennifer says that can be put in and sprinkle the rest of it. Is that correct?
we personally would be okay with a mixed system. The only reason we took that off the shelf was because of the fire department and CUD's reluctance for that. We would be, if that was 300 houses with fire hydrants and then the next 300 or 250 had sprinklers, we as an applicant would be perfectly fine with that. It'd just be like having two subdivisions next to each other that had, you know, one had this and one did not.
Personally, I would rather have some fire hydrants and the rest sprinklers than no hydrants at all in the neighborhood. I know that goes against your motion. But a mixed system, I think,
I'll withdraw my motion.
Sprinklers.
What does the will serve letter, help me understand what it says today? What will CUD say they would provide that's in this right now?
I would defer that to Ms. Wood. She's coming back up.
Basically they said that they could do, the original will serve letter said they could serve 400 homes with the extension down Ocala that we're going to do regardless. Or if we wanted more, I think at the time it was 618 was the request, but we'd have to go to a sprinkler system on everything. And then we went and petitioned CUD to do the facilities improvements plan, trying to figure out if there was a line close by, a reasonable distance away that we could improve and get away from the sprinkler system. And we did that, I guess, foolishly on our own. We may not be discussing the 8,000 feet here tonight if we had not done that. That's my understanding. And then we have not done a mixed use system.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. When they first gave us a water availability request, that was the initial analysis was 400 or with fire hydrants or all of them be sprinkled. And that was, when I write a water availability request, I always put in there to check with a local regulating body as far as what is required. CUD does not have a requirement on fire protection. We make an analysis on whether or not the fire protection that is deemed necessary for the development can happen, and if that cannot happen, what would be required to make it happen. So that is essentially what I have put in a will serve letter. Like, that is the option if the local regulating body, such as yourself or the fire chief, deems that those fire sprinkler systems are an option. That is what CUD system can support. And going back to the mixed use that we talked about the last time, which is I think November, there was a lot of things in flux with the number of lots because of the lot size, those kinds of things, and that went in front of our board last month, and that was just approved last week. And I have preliminarily looked at a mixed use fire protection and fire hydrants as well as sprinkler, but we haven't finalized anything. So I have looked at that because that was what we talked about before. In the conversations with, we didn't know exactly how many lots that were going to be in the subdivision based on what we came up with on the lot requirements. That was kind of in flux, as well as just having conversations about the preference, I guess, for a mixed use. So I'm certainly happy to take a look at that if that's what you guys decide that you want to move forward with. Like I said, it may not be our preference, but we don't set fire requirements at CUD. We analyze what can happen, whatever it is that you guys deem appropriate, or the fire department as far as that is concerned, whether it's fire hydrants or fire sprinklers or a combination of both, which is what we see a lot of times on a commercial side. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear as well.
Jennifer, you mentioned a few minutes ago 400 houses of capacity with hydrants, but
right.
If you sprinkle, you have to take back out of that.
That's right.
And you mentioned they take up all the development. I mean, if this guy gets approved and they get all the water they can, all the lots they can, and the guy on the lot next door wants to build a house, is there enough water left for him?
No, that's what I was saying before. I have to take that in consideration.
You've got to hedge enough to let the next guy at least.
That's right.
Water
and that's
his cows. Maybe not a development, but at least have a.
Yeah, I mean, y'all, that's like a delicate balance, right? Okay, on at what point do you require somebody to make off-site improvements? There have been a number of developments over the years that have had to do off-site developments to make their development happen. It's just part of it. That's not something I'm not really concerned with The dollars, so to speak, on the developer side, I know that's something they're concerned with, and we have to come up with a reasonable conclusion of what can happen, okay? So the dollars for, say, the Ocala Road part, I looked up, our engineer's estimate was $420,000, for that's the piece that they have to do no matter what. The other part was $748,000 as an estimate to go under 840 and go down Shores Road. That was, you know, that was what we came up with what would be required for that development and to not take up all of the capacity out there. We do have additional capacity out there now. We build that in for future development when we do improvements. Like any utility would reasonably consider that for future. But we can't necessarily let them take up all of that future capacity, so the guy who has a 2-acre parcel can't put a house there because they've taken that. So there's a delicate balance in there on what you come up with when you run an analysis as far as considering all of those things at one time. And so that's kind of where we are, I guess.
We don't have a Wilson letter tonight to do a mixed-use system.
No, we do not, but that is certainly something that I can do if that's what you guys vote on and that's what you want to do. I can certainly come up with a mixed. It probably wouldn't be too far off what Mr. Taylor has estimated, but I won't put that on record as far as that's official, but I'll certainly take a look at it. I was just talking to Mr. Parks back there, and I could do that, and I can get it to you in 2 weeks. If that's what we need to do.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this project with the developer installing the maximum number of hydrants that CUD will be able to serve and the remainder being sprinkled.
Motion. Anyone want a second?
But it goes against what we said at the start of the meeting we were against, TCD and fire.
We have a motion and a
Question,
second.
didn't the fire chief, wasn't he against the division? Didn't he want one or the other?
I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but yes.
And we by no means mind paying for off-site development to make our project feasible. I think that's obvious by the things that we've offered at Almoville, by running the water line down Ocala, by making the improvements to Old Shores and the intersections of Old Shores and Ocala. But I think several people have used the word reasonable. Throw out 1.5 miles. I probably can't run that far. I think that's where we came to a struggle on what was reasonable.
And I think you were absolutely right earlier when you said if nobody had ever mentioned the improvement to that line, and this has just come the whole time as a sprinkled development with no discussion about an improvement to that line, this thing would have been approved 2 months ago, and we would have moved forward with a sprinkled subdivision out there.
And I think you said it right. We've got some very large developments that were allowed to sprinkler, waiting on more adequate facilities to get there to be able to feed the hydrants. And I think the way that, Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the way sprinkler subdivisions are set up is you install it like the fire hydrants are there. You may even pay for the hydrants with your development. You just don't install them so nobody's confused about the pressures and the flows. That way, whenever the facilities do get there, you're able to go back and get that installed.
Doug, I have a question for you. So I know, especially because of the type of development this is, you felt strongly that we needed to have it absolutely nailed down about which way we were going to do the fire protection. And to me, I mean, we always say, you know, the basic infrastructure's got to be there. So, I mean, you don't get any more basic than water. So what are your thoughts on proceeding with the motion the way it's currently worded?
Well, I mean, if nothing else, we've got some clarity at least as to how we're going to move forward with it, how the developer's going to move forward. Basically, as I understood Jim's motion, was that they'd put in hydrants until they couldn't put in hydrants anymore, and then they would sprinkle the remainder of the homes. I mean, it's not a whole lot better really than where we were, but it's at least something that we can tell them to go ahead and put in here. At least it's something we can say, okay, that's what they're going to do.
I can correct one thing that Mr. Taylor is alluding to. In the past, you guys have, in some certain subdivisions, I believe, you would have liked to have seen the T's already on the plan, on the construction plan, so that when future improvements were made, those hydrants can be put in. We do not do sureties or bonds or anything like that, so that becomes very confusing as far as if that is a stipulation that you make as far as making the developer put those sort of things in, who pays for that? Because that isn't something that is paid for on the front end, and we're sitting there holding that money for 10 or 15 years whenever somebody makes an improvement for that to happen. So I just wanted to clear that up. We don't do sureties, we don't do bonds, we don't hold that kind of money like that, as far as we don't collect money for a fire hydrant that isn't going to be put in because it's not feasible to be able to be put in. So I just wanted to clear that up too.
Any other questions or comments to the motion? I've had a meeting with Mayor Burgess this afternoon, and I apologize for, I don't know whether you guys have seen a commercial on TV. This lady can't find her car keys, and her husband finds them in the refrigerator, and I said, that's probably me, because I went off and forgot what I was supposed to bring to that meeting. But the more we've talked, the more confusing I get, and I know it's probably confusing to the general public, but could we please summarize what the motion is, as opposed to what the request was?
Well, I don't necessarily think that the motion and what the request was, the original request, have really changed any. Basically, what Mr. Averwater's motion is, and correct me, Jim, if I'm wrong, but what I heard you say was you move to recommend approval of the development. They will install hydrants, fire hydrants, to the ability that they can, you know, as far as how far the water pressure, water volume, all that will allow them to do so. When they hit that point where they can no longer install hydrants, then they will sprinkle the rest of the development. Is that pretty much what you're okay, thank you. Now, again, that's pretty much, originally they had come in, that was pretty much where they were going with that. At the time I had said, well, you know, we'd like to know, what are you doing? This is a plan development. We need to know exactly what's going on, not just kind of leaving it up to chance. This is still up to chance to some extent, but at least it's something they can put in here. So when 30 years later down the road, if they're still developing houses out there, which I'm sure the developer hopes they're done long before that, but when I'm not planning director, Mike's not county engineer, we have a whole different planning commission, they won't come back and say, okay, what were they supposed to do for fire protection in this particular development? And at least we'll have something in there that now we can point to.
Motion would give the flexibility if for some reason that line got improved for a neighboring development or whatever, they could just keep right on.
That's correct. Yes, sir. They could.
And if not, and we pick a hard number, the thing's got to come back here and go. We could be out there sprinkling houses 10 years from now where there's water, adequate water there at that point in time. So this motion actually, in my opinion, is a little more favorable than having a, say, a 350 and a 202 or whatever number out there. So, because a lot of stuff will change in the next 10 years. It takes them to get to that first 300 plus houses.
So to clarify my mind, maybe your guys are really clear, but on page 6, it's got all the different phases. We're approving all the phases. Could all the phases be developed different houses in different phases be developed right now?
Ask that again, I'm sorry. You're saying?
We're approving the whole thing, right?
Right.
And I see a number of different phases on page 6 as an example. And let's just say a certain developer wanted to build some houses in phase 3 and some in phase 4 and some in phase 1 and some in phase 2. Could they do that right now?
Well, of course, a lot of that's going to depend on where they start. I mean, if they're starting in phase 1 over here, this is where indeed phase 1 ends up being. The infrastructure and everything is going to have to be installed for phase 1 for them to do that. They wouldn't be able just to jump to phase 2 or 3 without putting all the infrastructure in, like the step systems and all the other stuff to go along with it. So reasonably speaking, they're going to stick with one phase at a time, or significantly complete one phase before moving on to another.
Theoretically, you can get back to the last phase, and that's where the sprinkler systems would go?
Correct.
Theoretically?
Theoretically, yes, sir.
So theoretically, you could not have sprinkler systems in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. Next door neighbors, one has sprinklers and one doesn't.
As I understand the motion, again, they would install fire hydrants, again, to the extent that they could. At some point, there'll be a line, if you will, where we can no longer do hydrants out here. It's going to have to be sprinkled from this point on. More than likely, that probably would be somewhere in one of the sections, or maybe if the sections are broken into different phases, one phase would have it, maybe one wouldn't. But at this point, it's hard to say when that would be. But from what I'm understanding from all the discussion I've heard, is it's probably not the first initial phases that are going to be approved that are going to be the issue. It's going to be when they get 200, 300, 400 lots into the subdivision, that's when the numbers may start not working out right, as far as that goes.
Go drive down Ocala Road, there's a lot of land out there. You know, and in my opinion, if we approve this motion, we'll probably end up with fire hydrants through the entire thing. Because over the years, as other property develops, this developer may end up partnering with the guy next door and improving that road and that line at some point in time, but it's going to take years, several years, to build the first 300 some houses. That road, that line will get improved by somebody. This developer may end up paying for all of it, may end up partnering with whoever's next door or down the road or something like that. As more water comes online, then we could very easily be approving this right now with fire hydrants through the entire system before it's over with. Because this is 500 lots is at least a 10-year subdivision, minimum.
Doug, I have a question. If we approve this the way it's worded, is it CUD's responsibility to hold them accountable for that maximum installation of the fire hydrants? Will they be the ones watching this?
Well, I think it'll be both. I mean, whenever we get our development plans in for our submittal deadlines, we scan them and we send them to Consolidated Utility. Of course, the developer should be doing that as well, but we do that as kind of a fail-safe, for lack of a better word, to make sure that they have seen it. So what happens is we do our review, Consolidated does their review, they send us their comments. Larry Farley, we send him a copy, or we tell him that when the meeting we're going to do our review, he'll sit in on it. We'll take his comments. We make a laundry list of comments and send that to the engineering firm, and from there, that's when we'll know at that point if Consolidated says, hey, you can do sprinkler or you can do fire hydrants for X amount of lots, but that's it. After that, you got to put sprinklers. Then we'll know that, and then we'll bring it to the Planning Commission. So there's a lot of checks and balances in there that we'll be able to catch that.
Answer my questions. Anyone else? Ready to vote? All those in favor of approving? All those in favor of approving item 7A, item number 14-A013, please say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7B, Dan and Christy Allen. The item number is 15-A001. Location is 509 John R. Rice Boulevard. The County Commissioner is Philip Dodd. The size is approximately 1.4 acres, tax map 92B, Group E, Parcel 8.0. Existing zoning is residential medium density. Proposed zoning is OP, which is office professional. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is located along John R. Rice Boulevard. It's actually located at the intersection of Wickham Court and John R. Rice. The property owners received a special exception by the BZA at their June 11th, 2014 meeting to operate a beauty salon, as a home-based business. The applicants have since made a number of renovations to the property and would like to operate the residence as a full-time salon without having to live on the property. Now, home-based businesses, of course, one of the very first conditions for a home-based business is that, yes, you have to live on the property in order to conduct the business. So essentially what they're asking for is rezoning of the property so they do not have to live on the property. They just want to use it as a salon. We've had a number of conversations with the applicant, and quite frankly, we've expressed our reservations with this request. There are commercial zones not too terribly far away. Of course, you can kind of see on the map, I don't know if my cursor, yes it is. You can see the avenue and everything across I-24, of course that's a good ways down. On the other side of Gresham Lane, of course, is the Agri Park property, which is in the city of Murfreesboro, but is zoned as a planned commercial development. Further up John Rice, when you get a little further up, of course, there's quite a few commercial developments going on up in that area. That being said, this particular property is completely surrounded by residential uses, again, with the exception of I-24, which would be to the, I guess that'd be the east-northeast. There are also other existing subdivisions in this area, and even with OP zoning, office professional, which has a limited range of uses as compared to, say, like a commercial neighborhood or some of the more permissive commercial zones. Staff is of the opinion, and had shared this with the applicant on the front end, that we did not think that this was an appropriate request for this particular property to be rezoned. That being said, we did explain to the applicant what the process was, and if they wanted to move forward with it, that was certainly their prerogative, that they could do that, and that we'd bring it to you for your consideration. But that staff would probably be making a recommendation, a negative recommendation to the application. The applicants are present. I'll go through the pictures real quick. This is looking down John Rice. That's at the intersection, just a little further down there at Wickham. This is looking directly across the street. You can see the Embassy Suites right across the street. This would be looking up toward the northwest as John R. Rice continues on. This is actually looking onto the property and a next door neighbor. This is the driveway. This is some of the improvements that they've made, installed a larger drive. And this is Wickham Court in this area right here. This is just another view looking down Wickham. And this is looking toward the back of the property right here, showing some of the improvements that they've made. We have received a number of phone calls about this request. There were one or two that were just general information. There were several that were in opposition to it. I did not receive any that I remember being in favor of it. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Again, the applicants are present.
Questions for staff? Not yet. You'll get your turn. You've been very patient, but.
So, Doug, it's a hairstyling place now, or?
Well, it was approved as a home-based business for a hair salon. In other words, it's still residentially zoned, but they got approval to do hair care, hair salon type activities there.
And so they're wanting to change and do something else?
They want to keep doing the salon, but rather than do it as a home-based business, they just want to do it as a strict commercial property so they don't have to live on the property. That's what they're asking for.
The applicant here, you might want to come forward and make some comments if you would before we get into our public hearing.
I'm Dan Allen, owner of the property with my wife, who is the master stylist. Our goal for this is certainly not to modify a neighborhood. And with that, working with Doug, we've come up with that the zoning would be office professional, the most restrictive of any of your zonings besides, as a next step. Looking at the home-based business, we're restricted to 500 square feet. 500 square feet being 25 by 20, so from this corner, basically that amount of space, which doesn't allow for the hair wash station and whatnot. It's more of that we do not want to change the physical exterior of the building. It's just that with the major home business that you guys have allowed us to have, that 500 square feet is basically the limitation, which is the big thing. The others are 10 clients a day, along with no more than 5 clients at a time. With 500 square feet, that logically you can't get to that. It's been a successful business. At times, we have not promoted it because we don't have signage, but we have made the improvements. The improvements were into a driveway with also corrected drainage, corrections to the house. It was, I won't say it's was dilapidated when we got it, but we had to make anything from foundation improvements through to electrical, through to drainage, through to plumbing, through to just about everything to bring it even up to a usable attitude. Now, we have been living in the property. We did have many discussions with Daniela and Doug about this, and again, understand that it is where where it is physically on the map, but we know that John R. Rice has an extreme amount of traffic, and with that, the plan is to eventually increase that size of John R. Rice. This may be the first step, and again, it's with the most restrictive of what you can have a professional, general professional services is this office professional. So a beauty shop does fall under your general professional or personal services. We're just looking to move just to that situation where we can basically use more than the 500 square feet allowed. The other is we've made the handicap. We've met the buffer requirements. We've done an investment basically to get to this point to show you in good faith that we are would make the investments needed, you know, whether it be in parking, whether it be in handicap, all those kind of things. So want to grow the business there. Any questions?
Mr. Allen, I'm assuming when you expand your square footage that your client base will also expand, increasing traffic.
Absolutely. I think the side being is that we'd be able to get into more areas. We'd be able to do a facial, for example, which takes, you know, you're laying down, or wax or whatnot. We'd have a few more employees involved as well. And you did see it. The driveway was designed so that it would have 4 plus 12 parking spots. So it has not been lined. It is just looks like a driveway at this point. But it was done with the standards of, you know, if we're going to make an investment, we want to invest toward the future, and that's our goal is to invest in this building in this way.
Questions for Mr. Allen at this point? Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
This time we'll conduct our public hearing on item 7B. The item number is 15-A001. Anyone wishing to speak may come forward.
My name is Susan Menifee. I live at 114 Wickham Court. I live 2 houses away from their salon, or whatever they want to call it. And we have a cul-de-sac in there. And I just don't understand why anybody would want to change that. Children get off the bus right there at the driveway of going into their place. The children get on and off the bus there. They walk. They ride bicycles in that cul-de-sac. They walk dogs. Why would you want to take a residential area that's been that way for almost 20 years and change it. I don't understand why they didn't buy someplace that is commercial someplace else. There's no commercial right around there. The cul-de-sac backs up to subdivisions, so there's nothing commercial anywhere around there. And I will agree they have improved the house, but that's not the point. I don't understand why. Why would you want to take a residential area that's been that way? It's more like a neighborhood. We know our neighbors, we talk, the kids ride and so on, and want to start changing it. And yes, they do face J.R. Rice Boulevard, but he's talking about doing this and doing something else. And the cul-de-sac right now is an area where people can come and the kids can walk, and there's cars, and they are careful and so on. And I've lived there the entire time of that subdivision. And I did not intend to have a commercial anything close to me. And I don't think anybody else in my neighborhood did either. So take that in consideration. If somebody came to the corner of your house and decided to do something commercial, how you would feel about it, because I just don't know why they didn't do someplace else, someplace that there's no other commercial areas around there that would draw people there. He's talking about signage. Is he going to put big signs on our street and all that to get people out there? Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak?
I'm Janet Reams, and I reside at 616 Joshua Court, and it's a street over from the Allens. And I want to go back and speak to the fact that when they received this major home-based business, it should have occurred to the applicants at that point that this was not going to meet their needs. It's very specific about how much parking you need, where the signage would go, how much you would need as far as any of the other things that go with a typical home-based business. And so I looked over the minutes of that meeting where this had been approved. And the Allens had indicated, Dan Allen indicated, that they were going to use an area of 500 square feet with a handicapped accessible restroom that would allow Miss Allen to work from home. So at that point, we did not attend the meeting because that seemed perfectly reasonable. There was already an office at the back of that home, and there was parking facilities, and somebody had already been using that as an office space to begin with. But there was no increase in traffic noted. There was nothing that really jumped out at you and said commercial or business. So I want to go back and talk about that a moment, because Mr. Allen indicated that they were going to put parking along that driveway and in that area, as I understand it, to the back of the house. According to and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the parking that's allowed is not in the front of the area anyway, so I don't know where you would come up with, say, 12 parking spaces. I went through and basically checked out that, and I'll get to that in a moment, but as I watched this take place, this internal conversion of the business, the home into a business space, you could note it from the street. There was lights that can be seen through the big picture window. There's a neon sign that says open. Later on, there were white cling letters that said what the business was and their whole, little thing of what they offered. And so it was very evident that this was much more than a home-based business at this point. So when I saw the sign go up that said Revive Day Spa, Salon Day Spa, whatever, there was some signage out in the front yard, like little real estate signs. I called Mr. Terry Barnes of the State Board of Cosmetology and asked what this business was licensed under. And his reply was a full-service salon. So I'm saying all this to say that based upon, excuse me, I'm dry. I've been sitting here a while, so pardon me for swallowing so much. Based upon what Mr. Terry Barnes was telling me of the State Board of Cosmetology, he had licensed this as a full-service salon based upon the fact that the entire home was now a salon. Now, based upon a major home business, only 25% of the gross feet, as I understand the description of that, should be a major home-based business or a minor home-based business. It's running under that whole little listing of what that is. So, at this point, I asked Mr. Barnes if they were living in this home, and his indication at that point was no, that the entire home was a salon. So he went back to investigate it again. At this point, they were living in a 500 square foot of area, supposedly a small apartment, and they had taken the stove out of the kitchen, which indicated to him that it was now a business. So if the State Board of Cosmetology feels that they are already running a full-service salon, that would indicate to me that they are now living in the area that they came to this board to propose in the beginning, and that this was all done under the umbrella of a major home business with the idea of going to a commercial development. Now, that's just strictly my opinion based upon what I saw. As far as the 12 parking spaces, if it's a traditional home with 3 bedrooms, which is what is described in the minutes of the first meeting, I would say that you probably need 19. If you already have 3 stations in there, which is much more than a home business would require, you already were determined to do something more than a home-based business at the very beginning. And I base that 19 on 3 hairstylists with a possibility of 1 in the chair and 1 waiting to be serviced, a manicurist, a possible esthetician, a possible massage therapist, or other professional, and parking for their clients who were with them and who were waiting to be serviced. So with that thought, you're looking more like 19 parking spaces, and it's on a 1.4 acre piece of property. So I would be hard-pressed as a neighbor to wonder how you were going to blacktop that, deal with the septic tank, the water runoff, and a turnaround place for your clientele. So that means that the cul-de-sac would then become a turnaround area, and the traffic would increase, the flow of people to the salon would increase. There would be signage, and at that point, we are looking at a very undesirable situation for our community. So my main thing here is I want to say that this would impact a lot of different things in our community, the perk value of the land, the increased stormwater runoff. It's on the corner of the cul-de-sac, as this lady said. That's a problem with school children. There is a curve right below this home that has been the site of numerous accidents, and I think that this would also be a distraction at that point. A full-service salon could operate 12 to 15 hours a day. It could have full and part-time employees, and that would definitely increase the number of the traffic and the volume coming to our neighborhood. So I noted that everything that they had done, when I went down and inquired about permits for all of this, the only permit that I could find was actually 2. One was an electrical permit that was pulled by the Rose Construction. There was a rough-in made, but no final inspection. And then there was also a permit for some sort of porch that is to be covered in the spring. But with all this renovation, I would assume that there would have been more permits. So I submit that this office professional institutional district is not an appropriate permit to be issued for a full-service hair salon with the potential to create more traffic and a larger number of people and an RM medium-density residential zoning ordinance.
Thank you. Evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sheila Bennett. I live at 621 Joshua Court, which is the cul-de-sac next door to Wickham Court. And I agree with both ladies that have spoken Previously, my husband, myself, and our family has lived on Joshua Court for 23 years. We were on Joshua Court when the street was still a dirt road because there wasn't enough homes on the cul-de-sac for it to be paved. So we've watched everything grow. We knew Mr. Gray, who owned the home that the Allens now purchased, and when he had all that property running cattle and horses over there, and then sold it off where it's now, I believe, 12 homes in the subdivision. Along with that, they showed some pictures earlier, and if you really looked at the driveway, which is very nice, goes parallel with Wickham Court. And again, if there's a customer leaving that driveway, they could block visual aid from the people leaving Wickham Court coming in or out. Yes, there's been several wrecks. In fact, there was a rollover there just yesterday in the curve there at Wickham Court. It is a very dangerous curve, and that's where the city connects, or the county line, city line is. Also, too, along with the picture window in the home, it's a very nice picture window, but again, they have put advertisements on the window. There are no curtains for any kind of privacy. So when you're driving down John O. Ross Boulevard, you see their green paint, all the lights around the mirrors. So there's no privacy for the customers there getting their hair done, or to hide that it is a business and make it look like a residential like it's supposed to be. Again, my husband and I did not attend the first meeting. We had no problem with it being a home-based business. Entrepreneurship, it's open to everybody. Use your 500 square feet, but it appears to be apparent that's not what it was intended to be from the get-go, and it has escalated to a full-fledged business as it appears. Also, a concern for my husband and myself is the septic and the sewer and the runoff. The landscaping is kind of a tilt, so the water's going to run off. It's going to cut across to probably Joshua Court, across our neighbors, Sandy and Dwayne Jeffries, into the ditch that separates our two homes and drop into the sinkhole that we have in our yard. The sinkhole does hold water. I'm going to say 11 months out of the year. If it's a dry season, if it's a wet season, it's got water all the time. We have wild ducks flying into that. We also have horses on our property. We have 5 acres back there at the end of at 621 Joshua Court, and we have livestock drinking out of that cul-de-sac. Sinkhole. So I am concerned about toxins and everything into the environment. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just a couple of things that I'd like to add to that. Oh, I'm sorry. Dwight Nelson Reams, 616 Joshua Court. The septic system, with it being a non-commercial, it seems like it should, before anything else is done, should be environmental impact study, and I don't believe that the existing septic system can handle a full-fledged salon. Lots of water, lots of waste going down. The other thing is when they first opened up, and we got the letter that says that was stating the pros and cons, they were going to remove an old shed that was in the back. And if you look back, you'll probably see where that's listed. There's an old shed back there, and unless that thing has been moved today, I believe it's still sitting back there. And it should have been moved a long time ago, for the reason being, if nothing else, the reason being is it is a skunk harbor. And believe me, there are skunks there. I believe anybody that lives around here can tell you that in a heartbeat. But I would say that would be the number 1 or 2 thing that should be done. But other than that, I believe the ladies have done a very fabulous job, and thank you.
Please forgive me, I'm nervous. My name is Michelle Hopkins, and I live at 108 Wickham Court, right beside Susan. So my property touches the back side of his property, the side of my property does. And the prior owner did run a home-based business out of that, but very little traffic, never really had any problems. And I think with the amount of traffic that I've seen so far with that, and pulling out of Wickham Court onto John Rice, that little hairpin curve is known for many, many accidents, and I just don't think traffic-wise, and then also the children on the street too. But please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for or against this proposed rezoning? Seeing no one, I'll declare the public hearing closed.
I can think of a whole lot of reasons to be against this. It sets a precedence for the rest of the houses down through there. It's, you know, a home-based business is supposed to be something to help somebody, in my opinion, get up and running, and then when the business gets successful enough, move to an appropriate area. You know, this just doesn't fit with, I was down that road today. They're all houses. If you approve this one, you're going to probably have 12 more, 10 or 12 more right behind it. I wouldn't be surprised with not a restrictive covenants in the subdivision. We don't enforce them, but most subdivisions have something that would probably, you know, say you can't do this anyway. And if the BZA was told this was just going to be something for Miss Allen to be able to work from home, and now we've gone up where we're going to have somebody doing facials and stuff like that, that's getting a pretty good ways beyond what the BZA was apparently told, according to what people said here tonight. So with that, I'll make a motion to deny.
I have a motion and a second to deny. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor of the motion to deny item number 15-A001, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? That motion carries. The request is denied. Item number 7C, Frank Bauer. The item number is 15-A002. The location is 5636 Lebanon Pike. The county commissioner is Steve Piercy. The size is approximately 29 acres. Tax map 46, parcels 35.0 and 8.0. Existing zoning is residential medium density. Proposed zoning is commercial services. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is located along Lebanon Pike, and excuse me a second, I turned past my page I wanted. Portions of some of these parcels are already zoned and used for commercial purposes. You can see on the map before you can see that there's commercial services here in this area right through here. This is all pretty much all the same property. This is part of the rezone. The actual rezoning that he's asking for is this area here, this area right in here, and then this area through here. The commercial activities on this property have expanded over the years and quite frankly should be zoned commercial. After speaking with the applicant, it was agreed that the zoning upon the portions he currently uses would be the best course of action, actually rezone those properties. The applicant's also proposing to zone his existing residence on parcel 35, which is this in this area, as commercial as well. His existing residence and the use of the property would become non-conforming at that point. He could still live on the property, but if he ever wanted to redevelop it, then he could do so as a commercially zoned type property. So really, he's not proposing any new development at this point. I think as time goes on, he's envisioning that the business will continue to expand and has done a very good job in that area. So he's really looking more toward the future, zoning those areas that are already being used commercial to some extent, and then also some of these areas here that would allow him some future expansion. This area here, this map here is just a little pointing in a really wrong area. This area here would still remain zoned RM throughout this area here. So with that, I believe Mr. Bauer is present. Yes, yeah, he's here. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions for staff? the applicant here? Would you please come up? Please.
Okay, Frank Bauer, 5636 Lebanon Pike, Walter Hill.
Bauer, just a brief explanation of what you want to do.
Basically, I think most people know that we have a plumbing business in that area. It's grown, keeps expanding, so we have to keep moving out with buildings, and we're crossing over the line from where we already are, zone commercial, into residential that we want to expand into. So what we're trying to do is just to get that extra 100 feet beyond the already zone commercial, that when we expand into the residential, that we're now complying with commercial.
Any questions for Mr. Bauer?
Sure that I understand, was the home there, was that also as part of this request to go commercial? I'm sorry, was the home also requested to be rezoned to commercial?
Okay, you know where our house is on overlooking the river? That green part there?
Yeah.
That's where we live. Basically what I'm saying is, again, thinking of the future. I don't know if you know where our shop is, but the shop is right behind our house. As we grow the shop more and more, and my 3 kids are involved, that house that we presently live in may someday have to end up being offices. So while we're doing this, if that should ever happen, that would be like the offices, because we've outgrown where we are now. While we're at it, I'm going for 3 strikes. Behind the shop, the green part there that you see on the map where we live, and then that other part, yeah, right where that arrow is now, just to continue the commercial all the way across on the road frontage.
And I think as what I understand that Doug was saying is, as long as you live in the house, that's fine, but if you move out of that house, then it has to be used for commercial, is that correct?
Yeah, let me clarify that just a little bit. As long as the use itself, regardless of who owns it or who lives there, as long as the use continues and doesn't cease for a period of at least 30 months, it can stay residential forever. Now, if he ever wants to redevelop it, let's say he moves out and they tear down the house, or they convert it, let's just say they convert it to offices, at that point they could not go back to just a single family, because that would be against the zoning. But if someone is living there and it's continuously used as a residence, it can be that in perpetuity.
Any other questions for Mr. Bauer? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any questions for staff before we get into our public hearing? If not, I'll declare the public hearing open for item 7C, item number 15-A002. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this rezoning request? Seeing no one, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Commissioners?
Doug, everything in line as far as what you see, everything's...
Well, as far as, according to our staff report, after reviewing it, we felt that it was consistent with the comprehensive plan. Quite frankly, you've got commercial zoning, right here, and it's these properties here. this is reasonably going to be used for commercial. This pretty much already is, and it's going to be zoned that way. This is for future in this area. We felt it was consistent with the plan, so we recommended approval.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we approve this according to all staff comments.
Thank you. And a second. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve item number 15-A002, please say aye. Any opposition? That motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7D. Stuart Conway, the item number is 15-A003. Location is 5940 Burnt Knob Road. The county commissioner is Joe Gurley. The size is approximately 7.4 acres, tax map 77, parcel 23.08. Existing zoning is residential medium density. Proposed zoning is light industrial. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is located along Burnt Knob Road. As you can see on the attached map in your agenda, as well as the map on the screen, it is on the north side of Burnt Knob, immediately adjacent to the Rogers Group quarry. That quarry has been in operation since the 1980s, although it's been under different ownership during that time. The applicant's requesting to rezone this property to light industrial in order to construct mini warehouses on the property. We have included a concept plan in your agenda materials. I'll bring it up here on the screen in just a moment. Again, the concept plan has been included. The plan shows a total of 7 buildings with a total area of about 46,000 square feet. The facility will not have an office or manager's apartment. The plan shows a 50-foot TVA easement along the front of the property. You can kind of see a little area right through here that's cleared. That would, if this is approved, of course, site plans would have to be submitted for staff and eventually planning commission review for something that size. So we would verify the size of the easement to make sure that everything was legit as far as the development was concerned in that area. I list in there, I won't go over these in any real detail, but section 1103C of the zoning ordinance does list a number of standards for mini warehouses and those type developments, so you can look at those. If this were to be developed in that way, these standards would apply. This property does have a significant amount of slope, which runs toward Burnt Knob Road. Drainage plan is not required at this stage, but staff has alerted the applicant to the possible design challenges that could be encountered with this type of topography. We've also spoken with the fire chief in regards to the lack of water in this area. He feels that if the rezoning is approved, the proposed building should be designed incorporating firewalls, just because there's really not the ability to put fire hydrants out in that area due to a lack of water. Staff has also had conversation with the applicant regarding the proposed zoning of the property. They're asking for light industrial so they don't have to get a special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals. These type of uses, mini warehouses, are allowed by right in the light industrial zone. If they were in a commercial zone or even the office professional zone, they would have to be approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. That is the reason that they're asking for the light industrial classification. With that, any plan, again, if this is approved, would have to be submitted to our staff, to our office for review, and eventually to your review as well. Now, staff was neutral on this application, and when you look at our concluding comments in the staff report, I wouldn't necessarily say it's because we think that this has a reasonable chance of being some sort of a residential lot. I really don't think that's the case here. Our biggest concern, if you will, was just the amount of uses that are allowed under the light industrial zone. It is fairly wide open. It's not the most permissive zone we have, that's heavy industrial, but there are a number of uses that can be placed there. Now, commercial services, commercial, general, any of those could also accommodate that kind of a use. Again, it would require an extra step. At the same time, it does back up to or fronts a rock quarry that has been in operation, an operational quarry for quite some time. So with that, staff really wanted a little bit of guidance from the commission on that particular thing. If you are comfortable with a different zoning for the property, we would probably recommend that this be re-advertised and we'd come back with that as opposed to just changing the zoning here. If you're going from heavy industrial to light industrial, not so much of an issue, or if you're going from a more permissive commercial zone to a less permissive commercial zone, not so much an issue. If you're going from industrial to a commercial, while the uses may not be quite as intense in the commercial zones, there are differences as far as lot coverage in some of those zones, floor area ratio, those kind of things that actually are probably more intensive in the commercial zone than they are for the light industrial. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. I don't recall receiving just a whole lot of phone calls about this application. I'm kind of racking my brain right now trying to think about it. I don't recall really receiving any, although I do see some people out in the audience who I do know live in the area, so I think they want to make some comments. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Doug, you mentioned that this property is probably not real conducive to residential development. If it needs to be used for something, is this an appropriate use for that?
Well, many warehouse type facilities are generally the activity levels there are generally less. You don't have as much traffic in and out. Of course, this isn't a situation where there's going to be an on-site manager or anything like that. Generally, you got people coming in to drop things off in their unit or to pick things up from their unit. I mean, that's pretty much the traffic that comes in and out every day. As far as that kind of use in this area, it might be more appropriate than some of the other uses that you would see in something like that. Now, if you'll recall, I will bring this up. When we were first talking about the rezoning when we did the comprehensive rezoning a couple years back, originally when we looked at the existing quarries, and there are about 2 or 3 in the county, we looked at zoning them all heavy industrial, because what we tried to do was take the existing use that was there and try to match it up with the closest zoning category that would allow the use. Heavy industrial really is it for these type of uses for rock quarries, and quite frankly, only then by special exception, not even allowed by right. After discussion with the Planning Commission, it was determined, since this was already zoned residential behind it, it would just be zoned that way. We just leave it zoned residential. It would continue being a non-conforming use as it had been all these years. But that's just a little bit of background history for anyone who wanted to know.
You say commercial services was a little bit more restricted than the light industrial, but they had the BZA step?
It would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, yes, sir. If it's anything but light industrial, if it's commercial services, I think even commercial general, commercial neighborhood, or even office professional, it would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals at that point for the special exception for just the mini warehouses. Now, of course, anything that's allowed by right in that zone could still be built without having to do that. I'm going to check one thing real quick while I'm thinking about it.
Is there a house on this property, Doug?
I think you're looking at the aerial right now. There's just a bunch of trees. I don't think there's any house on it.
So is it going to be fenced and secured? It is?
Well, it'd be an
Fully
automated facility.
So that's why you don't have an attendant or anything.
Right. It would be an automated facility. Again, automated gates in and out. They would have to, I mean, we don't necessarily dictate what they have to do for security purposes, but for something like that, I would imagine they'd have to have some sort of fencing, security measures in place. They also have to have a type 3 buffer if it's zoned light industrial to the surrounding properties. Now, that's our most significant buffer that we've got is the type C, type 3 buffer.
I've seen many warehouses that's sticking out there, no fence around them, no gates and all that stuff. You just drive in,
right,
unlock your thing, but it's for sure that it's going to be fenced and it's going to be secured.
Like I said, I don't know for 100% certainty. Now, actually, I was going to bring up
Is the applicant here?
Yes, he's raised his hand. Let me pull up their concept plan. I was going to do that anyway.
This is just a rezoning. This isn't a site plan or anything.
Correct.
We're just rezoning it light industrial. If we zone it light industrial and they decide 6 months from now not to do this, there's a piece of property out there zoned light industrial with no many warehouses. So we don't know fence or whatever. It could be.
Yeah, they are showing the landscape buffer. Now, they are showing, you can see on the concept. Now, again, this is conceptual, but you can see they are showing a fence around here, right in this area. This X line around here, that indicates a fence. So they are showing fencing.
If we didn't want to blanketly zone it, we could request them to do a planned commercial development, could we not? And approve that because, if we approve this as I understand it, as I just stated, they could decide not to do that and 6 months from now sell it to somebody else.
Yes.
And it's already zoned light industrial.
That's correct.
Any of those uses could go straight on.
That's correct. Of course, they would have to do site plans, maintain buffers and all that, everything else.
But right to use it for anything in that zone.
Right, whatever the zoning ordinance says is allowed by right in that zone, or, they would have the right to go ahead and submit a site plan for that. That's correct.
Questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Would you please come up?
Stuart Conway, 3422 Lawncrest Cove, Murfreesboro, 37129.
Would give us your plans and.
Well, I first purchased this property back in the summer, and I'd hired Mr. Dickerson to do the soil testing on the property. It's extremely rocky, as you can see from the aerial. Rock quarry surrounds it on 2 sides. So, you know, my thought process, the only thing we could really do with the property is to do a mini warehouse facility, fully automated. There's nothing that we can place on the facility that requires sewer, so there'll be no residential, no you know, commercial operation that will require any sewer usage. So we're pretty much limited, and storage facility is, you know, low impact on the community, not much traffic going in and out like you would a residential or other commercial facility. It's pretty much the plan that we came up with.
Questions for Mr. Conway?
So your facility, I saw the concept plan right there. Fenced, how they going to rent the, I know we're not into that right now, but I mean, the public needs to know about this before we approve light industrial.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be in my district. I'm not a county commissioner now, so it's not in my district. So tell me about what you're going to do as far as security and fencing it and all that sort of stuff, and how you rent it and all that.
Well, basically abide by all the codes. You know, the fencing will be pretty high. It's, like I said, it's a, you know, it's an area that has a lot of wildlife in it. Some people hunt in the area. So it'll be fenced, high security, fully automated since there's nobody on the property. You know, be really secure. So
how do you rent the facility?
Well, there's a company out in Arizona that I've spoke with, I have lined up, and it's basically a kiosk system where you can come up, and actually the kiosk system dispense locks as well. So it's fully automated. It'll be in a covered shelter, so out of the weather, out of the elements.
So it'd be a paved or concrete area also as far as around it, and then of course your storage thing will be on a concrete pad, I guess, or so.
Absolutely.
Like that.
Questions for Mr. Conway? Thank you. This time we're ready for our public hearing. I'll declare our public hearing open for item number 7D 15-A003. Anyone wishing to speak to this rezoning request, please come forward.
I'm Gerald Sullivan. I live at 6018 Burnt Knob Road. My property joins this man's property. I spoke with him one day, I guess. You remember me? It was two men over there. I was wondering if you was one of them. I don't remember the face. Okay, but reason I come up here is, I don't know if you realize or not, there's no water out there. You would have, I don't know if you plan on having water at the facility or not, but you'd have to dig you a well. I've been out there for 22 years, 24 years all total I've had the property. And I met with the waterworks in Murfreesboro before I started building to see about what about the water, possibility of getting water. They said, oh, we're planning on having it out there pretty soon. I've been there 22 years living in the house, no water yet, except I had to dig my own well, 980 feet. The quarry has at least 2 wells on their property, and I was told they had 4. I'm not sure on that, but I know they've had 2, and they're over 1,000 feet deep. So you need to rethink about whether you want to put a business out there or not if you plan on water, but you better think about it, because I have not got Well, to begin with, I talked to the waterworks, like I said, put down a deposit down to have water connection. 3 months after I moved in my house, I got a letter from them, got my money back. They said, we don't know when we're going to get water out there. And it stops on each side of my hill from Murfreesboro to the bottom of Murfreesboro side, and on the east side, or excuse me, the west side, it stops down there from Smyrna. And they will not run that over the line over the hill. I was told one time there wasn't enough people lived up there. But if they went ahead and put a line in down there 22 years ago, there's 2 houses up there, plus the rock quarry. And I was talking to a gentleman from the rock quarry this past week, and they said they would love to have water out there. So if they'd had hooked up a line out there to feed these 2 houses plus the quarry, it done paid for itself, I would think. And so, I mean, I'm not against the man putting a business out there, because I knew it's going to happen one of these days. But he needs to rethink it, because it's going to cost him if he needs water. And that's about all I have to say. I like that area. Like I said, I've been there 22 years. If I didn't, I done moved. But it's on a hill called Burnt Knob, because I was told it was burned off years ago, and they changed it from Green Hill to Burnt Knob. But you need to really think about this before you try to get a business in out there, because I expected some trucking company maybe would come in out there one time, but as long as we don't have water, it's going to hold people back. Now, if they go ahead and run a line over that hill, it'd be some more houses out there, and I know it's 2 on between our property that I'm talking about. And those people have got a house over there, and they've got a well. Then his brother next to him's got property over there, and he's got a log house on it, and they moved out. They moved to Smyrna, and it's got a well. So, and the property that I've got next between him and where my house is, I got almost 4 acres in between us. And that property had a little house on it when I bought it, and it was in bad shape. So after the lady that was living in it, I let her live there as long as she was living, and she got cancer and died. And when she moved out, when her daughter moved out, I took the house down. I destroyed it. I had it torn down because it wasn't worth fixing. And it's got a well on it. It's now about 150 feet deep. And by us being on that hill, you've got to go as far down you go where water is before you get water. I mean, there wasn't any water in between that 980 feet at all, showed up at all. And I talked to my other man who's drilling the well, and he went over there and talked with the quarry and found out that how deep they were. And he come back and told me, you'll have to go that deep to get water, and they called it Knox. Some of you may know that. I don't know if you do or not. Knox is where there's plenty of water, they tell me. And I've had plenty of water so far, knock on wood. And I've been concerned about the quarry blasting, damaging my well. So far it hadn't. But it don't mean it's not going to happen. But I just got here. I had to say something about that. You better think it over before you build a business out there, because it's hard enough to to build a house out there, and it's solid rock. I mean, you can't. If you ever out Burnt Knob Road, I'm on the knob, and you'll see a rock fence in that area. My wife built that rock fence, and all the rock come off of our property. But that's all I had to say. I'm not protesting him against the business, but he needs to rethink it, I think. Thank you. Sorry to take up your time.
Anyone else? Evening.
I'm Eric Sullivan. I live at 6205 Burnt Knob Road. I'm not going to talk about the water, but it's just Burnt Knob it's a narrow road with the traffic just coming from the quarry and everything. It's pretty dangerous. I'm not really against the business. I mean, I understand it. There's, I probably would have made sure it perked before I'd bought it if I was going to build on it, but it is a rock pile and do something with it. But my big concern is the traffic. I know there's a dip right there where the road is, and just the visibility coming up and down the road. There's no shoulders on that road. The dump trucks are going up and down it. Probably wouldn't be that much, wouldn't be a huge traffic increase, but it would add a lot of traffic out there. So that would be my big concern, is just the safety aspect of it. I mean, if you ever go down through there, it's just barely 2 lanes, and then it just drops right off. So people pulling trailers, going in and out, things like that, which they usually do at those facilities, I'd just be really leery on that. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Clyde Roundtree. I'm a landscape architect with Huddleston Steel Engineering. We were the ones who put together the conceptual site plan, and I just want to address a few of the concerns that were expressed. As you know, the light industrial allows our client to streamline the process to get his business started. That's the primary desire that he has. You just found out that commercial services, any other zoning, as well as light industrial, there's very few applications that can be used on this piece of property. It's not really a developable piece of property due to the fact that the water is so inaccessible. So we feel like it's a good use for the piece of property that's available. Granted, we're going to have to deal with some grading and work through that process. Mr. Conway is more than willing to put the firewalls in that were recommended by Mr. Amasi, feeling that's a good safety precaution that would be smart to do on this piece of property due to lack of water for fire protection. The conceptual site plan reflects a natural buffer that's already going to be available, so he's not clear-cutting the piece of property. There's going to be a decent amount of land that's going to be preserved, as well as Mr. Damasi said, there's a type C buffer that'll be respected around the perimeter of the development. And as far as the impact on traffic, storage units consistently are probably the lowest impact on traffic in terms of how people use the facility. Granted, there will be trailers associated with the project, people pulling those kind of things in, but it's not the kind of facility that there's typically a heavy use in terms of a traffic burden. So we just want to make sure those concerns are alleviated from the neighbors. We respect them and appreciate their opinion, but we have considered the water consideration, and that's why the mini storage really makes the most sense for developing on this property. Thank you. I'm available if you have any questions as well.
Any questions for Mr. Roundtree? Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against this rezoning request? If not, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve with the conditions. It looks like the best use for the property.
Move for light industrial. I have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor of the motion to approve, please say aye. Any opposition? Let me say that again. Anyone wishing to vote to approve this, please say aye. All right. Any opposition? Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you. Interesting night. Before we get into staff comments, I'll try to remind everybody, and I hope I got the date right this time. It's our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, the 26th, 9 a.m., and it'll be in the mezz over at the planning office. Staff comments?
Yes, sir, just a couple brief items. At our next meeting on the 26th, that's what we call our annual meeting based on our bylaws. That's when we elect a new chair and those things. Typically, what we provide at that meeting, we provide an update to the work plan that we had submitted to you last year, just to kind of let you know what our progress was on that, and then present you with some ideas for things that we'd like to work on for the coming year. I'd like to ask you this year something a little different. We'll still do the same thing, but at the same time, I'd like for you to let staff know if there's anything that you think that we need to be working on. I don't want to seem like it's something that we're just dictating to you that's saying, yes, this is all we're going to work on and that's it. Of course, it's kind of a workable document to begin with. It's really more, these are things that we know need to be addressed. These are things we'd like to work on, but if you all can think of things that you would like for us to work on or to concentrate on, please let us know that. Even at the meeting or prior to the meeting, we can go ahead and work that in. We'd be happy to do that. Talking about the appointment of our committees, of course, we have two committees that we need to appoint tonight. One, the nominating committee. That's the committee that nominates both the chair and the vice chair for the Planning Commission. The other is for our budget committee. Now, that's not the budget committee that meets with the county commission. This is just a committee made up of just representatives of the Planning Commission. Essentially, we, staff, prepare the budget. We present it to generates 5 persons on the committee, and then the chairman serves as ex officio, so 6. We present it to that committee first prior to any Planning Commission action. That committee makes a recommendation to the full Planning Commission. The full Planning Commission then will take action on that, and we will do that at the day meeting in February. That's historically when we do that. And then it goes through the county commission process with Public Works in March, and then Budget Committee in May, and then and on from there. So with all that being said, the lucky nominees this year for the nominating committee are Veronica Buchanan, Mike Cush, and Jim Averwater. I've spoken, well, at least I've heard from all of them, either through email or speaking to them, that they were all willing to serve in that capacity. On Budget Committee, we have Will Jordan, Rhonda Allen, Charlotte P., Mike Vaught, and Steve Sandlin. Mike is the only one I have not talked to or heard from one way or the other. I don't have any reason to think he would not accept that. For Budget Committee, again, it's really just one meeting, generally about an hour or so long, and we'll coordinate that with you. So if I could have well, not to take your thunder, Mr. Chairman, but we need a motion to approve those recommendations, please.
For the request. Have a motion to approve the request and a second. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye. Motion carries.
That's really all I have. I don't know if Mr. Hughes has anything he wants to add to anything. Okay.
Mike, you done?
Ohio State's leading 14-7.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Thank you for your patience, your persistence, and your hard work tonight. We're adjourned.